Hi, Shane. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you. It's end of
Yeah,
day here, so I'm in a slightly different frame of mind to you guys, but yeah, 6 p.m. in Ireland.
I love it. Well, it's 10 a.m. here in San Francisco. So, and I'm actually, tend to have a lot of folks from all around the world that are listening. So I imagine every time zone, or at least many time zones, will be represented.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm particularly excited about this topic, why engineering leadership is more about soft skills, et cetera, because I think for a lot of particularly new engineering leaders, I think it can be common to kind of stick with the cerebral, if you will, like think about the tech side and maybe not as much about the people side. And so I thought when I saw this topic, I thought like it was just quite an interesting one. So, but would love to, if you don't mind introducing yourself to folks briefly and just kind of give folks a little idea of who you are, and then we can go from there.
Cool, great. Yeah, no, so it is, and the topic is it's really near to my heart because I was one of those intellectual engineers. So it's a journey I went on to get to where I am today. So yeah, my name's Shane Flynn. I'm the head of engineering for the Marco Polo network, which is a trade finance network based on permission blockchain. Simply keep it at that, distributed ledger tech. So trade finance is really basically, for anyone who doesn't know, is the providing loans based on the offer to pay based on invoices. So if I've got an order book and you, Dave, have ordered stuff from me, I can go to my bank and say, hey, Dave's going to buy this stuff that I'm making now. He's going to give me $1,000 next week. Will you give me $800 now? Because I got to pay the delivery guy who's brought all the raw materials. So that's effectively all it is. Really, really simple. But it's a really heavily paper-based industry, and it hasn't changed much since Marco Polo first went from Italy to China on the Silk routes. So, which is why we called ourselves Marco Polo. But it's a really heavy paper-based industry. About 80% of the world's invoices are still paper. Would you believe? So your Amazon delivery is a very different world to the world that most of the world live in, and it's really inefficient. So it's a huge business. There's about $20 trillion of global trade done every year. And of that, about well in excess of $100 billion is earned by banks in terms of funding. So one of the goals is to make that way more efficient, to take the paper out of it, to use the blockchain to create the trust between the buyer and the seller and the banks. So that's just an efficiency thing. But the spirit and the goal of the business itself is, in fact, to do something a little bit more social, which is there is a huge block of small to medium enterprises that are unfinanced because the cost of finance is too high for the banks to offer the services to them. And typically they're the businesses that need it most. So, General Motors has enough cash on hand to last a couple of years, probably. A small little supplier of washers to General Motors might only have 1 or 2 weeks of cash on hand. And therefore, the ability for it to finance backed on that General Motors order is huge. And that's what we're hoping to do, is open up, maybe $1 or $2 trillion worth of financing for those smaller businesses in order for them to survive and get through. I mean, COVID was a really good example of a bunch of companies that had to be really innovative to survive and stay and keep going.
Awesome.
I've been told to reorder my webcam. There you go. So I said, well, yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've been at this for a couple of years. I've been in tech for about 30 years, so long before you were born, Dave.
I'm 38, but that's all good. Almost.
Yeah, well, close enough, because what I was going to say, what it does mean is I'm one of the last analog generation. So we are the girls and guys who have a memory of life before cell phones and the internet and laptops and PCs and all that kind of stuff. And I think it gives us a really interesting perspective on what's happening and what's coming down the pipes now. And while it's difficult sometimes to create an analog between new tech and the old tech, the ability to do that, the ability to jump between the two is pretty nice. I've worked in global super mega cores like the massive HP Invents and all those kind of groups, and for a bunch of startups, some of which have been really successful and some of which have been way less successful. But it's all about learning and it's all about people. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, or what I sort of think the topic today sort of, really should be.
Awesome. Well,
so yeah, so that's me.
Yeah, that's excellent. And your background, I think, I love the fact that you have both the the large company experience as well as the startup experience, because I'm sure we have representatives from all of that, and as well state-of-the-art technology. Obviously, blockchain is very hot as well, so it's very cool to know that you're in that space. Well, I'd love to dive in actually and just kind of have like a starter question, if you will, but I also want to encourage the audience. We have the Q&A tab on the side of your screen where anybody can ask questions. So I highly encourage all of you, any of you, to ask questions. And even if you don't have questions from yourself, you can upvote other people's questions. So we tend to rely on each other to make sure that we get some great questions asked. So I highly encourage folks to put in your questions. And until then, I'll go off the set that I have. But be the brave person and go first. I encourage you to ask that first question. Again, this topic about why engineering leadership is more about soft skills. So this first question probably wouldn't be a surprising one, which is, how do you define soft skills?
Sure. I guess in the simplest, it would be it's working with people and not machines. So that'd be the simplest way of doing it. I mean, it's anything that is involved with the human side of what we're doing. Is just that's pretty broad and a catch-all. But almost everything you do in tech and in work involves human interaction. You know what I mean? And anything that helps you make that human interaction smoother, better, flow better is what I would call a soft skill. You know what I mean? And it's stuff we don't necessarily teach in engineering school. I remember when some of my friends were in college going through medicine, there was no concept of teaching bedside manner to doctors. And we all suffer from that, whereby you go and sit with a doctor who comes in and goes, hey, I just want to tell you, your mom's, got cancer and she's not going to make it. And you're going, oh, no, hold on. You could have done that in a much nicer way. And they now teach bedside manner to young college grads, or not college grads, pre-med grads, because they've realized that it's as important as being a brilliant brain surgeon. You know what I mean? I experienced that actually. My brother was involved in a horrible accident years and years ago, and the guy came out and literally did something like that. He said he'll either be paralyzed from the neck down or I'll save him perfectly. And thank heavens he did. And my brother has gone on to do lots of wonderful things and become a bit of a daredevil as a result. But there was no bedside manner, there was no soft skills involved at all, and the nurses were left to pick up the pieces. And I would say that's true of almost all disciplines and all industries, and it's something we just don't do enough training in and enough caring for and about in order to make things go well. And I've had very few projects go wrong because of technology. I've had heaps go awry because people weren't getting on, people were communicating really badly, just a whole heap of things that were just about people and not about machines. And so that'd be basically how I would describe it.
Well, it resonates with me tremendously. I always reflect for myself how young children are taught physical hygiene, but we're not taught emotional hygiene. And
Sure.
You go to school, you go to college, et cetera, and oftentimes, I mean, it's like most parents aren't really taught how to be parents, and maybe they do their best from a book, but we're all everybody kind of is born into some kind of challenge or dysfunction, or I mean.
Absolutely.
Life is not easy for anyone. And so I completely understand, I think all of us, right, on the tech side, we worked with engineers who very clearly don't, know how to navigate some of the human side of interaction. And that it's easy to forget, right? But no matter how smart we are and how reasonable we are, humans are emotional beings. And when we get angry, all of our blood tends to flow into the lizard brain, and our rational brain loses it, and we tend to not
absolutely
be on our feet in the way that we might hope that or think that we do. So,
but yeah, and it's absolutely, and it is, and I think I'm loath to say that mathsy people are sort of different in that way, but I think it's probably a truism to say we spend a lot of time in our heads, we spend a lot of time rationalizing things and making sense and using logic to solve everything, and when in fact, as you say, people aren't rational and humans are emotional, and very often, I think one of the things you see most often is people who are always completely reasonable and always completely rational in a workspace are in fact slowly building up this huge ball of tension because their emotional side isn't being met or dealt with in the interactions they're having every day. And they're logically going, oh, David didn't mean that because that's it. And they bottle it all up, and then when it explodes, it really explodes, and you've a hugely tense sort of standoff in a project for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, because instead of people learning to go, hey Dave, that kind of hurt me a little, and I don't think you meant it, but this is what I was saying when I was trying to make that point to you. And we don't teach those things to each other, and it's I would always say you teach best what you most need to learn, and I can be a little bit sort of on spectrum about some stuff and just completely miss something. And I had an experience just last week where it was only about a few seconds after the whole thing began to kick off that I realized I'd totally not picked up on a couple of physical cues that should have told me that the person I was dealing with wasn't really talking about what we were talking about, was talking about something else. I'm glad I noticed, but I caused them way more stress than I need to have or ought to have, because I was so focused on the problem. And of course, the problem wasn't the problem. The problem was something else.
Yeah. How many conversations have we had as engineers about something technical when, you observe that the other person, there's some kind of agitation or concern, or just the tone in which they're using it clearly illustrates that either they don't want to have the conversation or that there's something else going on. And how many times have we had those conversations and kept it technical and leave only to discover later, that something wasn't going well, or that some blow up later happened, or that, or that maybe other folks felt really uncomfortable, in that situation, and it caused them to not be as productive at work being around that kind of.
Sure. And it really is. And it's if anything, it's exacerbated by our current everybody working from home and out of the office, and it's probably eased up for you guys there. But we're in a position here in Ireland where I'm getting hopeful that it won't be the case, but at the moment the offices might not open until the end of the year. So there's been a full year of only dealing with people from the chest up, having no idea of any of the social cues or physical cues that are there, and you just don't see it, you don't pick up on it. And that realization that David's, I can see by the way he's just walked across the corridor there or in to get a sort of, a cup of coffee. I can see something's up with him. And if I bump into him later in the day, I'll know to be a little bit, sort of open to that being the case. And if he snaps at me, I'll go, hey, I know that wasn't me. I could see earlier he was a little bit agitated by something. Or if he seems a bit morose, I won't dump on him that, the latest delivery is going awry and we really need to sort of pile on more pressure. And you're missing that now, which is it's made the last year quite challenging, because those cues, which are so important, are lost to us. So you don't know right now, but I'm sort of kicking my legs away like crazy going, what's going on? Which you'd pick up if I was sitting in an office space.
Sure. So this is actually a great segue to this next question. And by the way, I want to again remind folks, go ahead and put your own questions in the Q&A tab. Let's get some more questions in there, and feel free to upload other folks' questions. How do you manage soft skills when your entire team is remote?
The same thing. A lot of it has to do with, there's two things. There's some very obvious ones in that as a leader, or as anybody who's facilitating a session, a sort of, a Zoom-based, design session, or even a, e-whiteboard design session, you've got to consciously make sure that you're making space for everybody, and especially for the quieter folks. So there are people with who just aren't comfortable speaking up, and you need to consciously make time and make space for them. And you really look for those cues, like really genuinely, it's a harder job I would say as anybody, but as leader in particular, to make sure you're looking at that and noticing are there people who've gone from camera always on to camera off for the last few sessions? Is somebody who's normally really chatty quietening down, and just trying to get in and understand that. And all of a sudden you realize that, in one of the meetings that you weren't in a couple of days previously, Sherry had just dumped on Dave, and Dave was just feeling like, I'm not going to say anything now. And the project suffers, a sprint goes awry because of it. And very often it's just, I don't know if you're familiar with Zoolander, but there's a wonderful scene where the two guys, Ben Stiller and other guy, Hansel, and but they're looking at each other going, well, why are you raging on me all the time? He goes, well, why are you really nasty to me? And that's all you needed. It was just a case of acknowledge the other's emotion, acknowledge the other's feelings. They don't want you to do anything about it. They just want you to go, hey, I'm here, and I'm not just a unit of production in the sprint team. I've got lots of other stuff going on, and I need to sort of that to be heard and seen. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work than it was in an office as a result. But over 70% of my engineering staff are remote because they are, in fact, they work inside of Lohika. So I have a huge engineering team that is based in Odessa and Lviv in the Ukraine. And in the good old days, I used to go out there once a quarter and spend a week with them. I haven't been out there in over a year, and we're heading for 2 years now, which is really hard and really tough. But it meant you were used to remote working. We were probably more used to it than a lot of other industries because remote is something we've been doing for a long time. But you do need to watch it. You do need to look and encourage people to one-on-one talk to each other. And if that doesn't work, arrange a facilitation. It's not quite an intervention, but go, look, I've chatted to both of you now. I know both of you aren't happy with where it is. So let's the three of us just sit down and thrash this out. And generally speaking, unless there's an actual problem, like somebody's behavior is truly, unacceptable, and that moves you into a different conversation altogether, it's just a misunderstanding. It's just somebody not realizing that, and I just by dint of, say, the Ukrainians or Eastern Europeans, they can be very forthright and very blunt. It's a very black and white way of communicating, which is sometimes quite difficult to take if you're not used to that kind of honesty. And when they say, that's a stupid idea, they mean it's a stupid idea. They don't mean you're stupid for having the idea. They just mean there is no technical merit in it whatsoever, and we won't even consider it for further conversation. But it comes across like, what's up with you, David? I can't believe you even brought that to this conversation. And it's really tough. So you look for those cultural cues that, you coach them on being a little bit softer, and you coach other people to go, try not to take that seriously because it's not a personal affront. And if it ever becomes one, we'll deal with that because that's obviously completely unacceptable. But yeah, so it is that kind of level of just, is it cultural? Is it stress related? Trying to keep tabs and knowing what's going on in people's lives. Are their parents well? Are their family well? And even simple things like, is their pet well? You know what I mean? So there are people whose, the passing of a pet can cause huge angst. And I worked for a company a few years back, and they brought in pet bereavement as a valid, in the same way that, family-based bereavement, they'd pet-based bereavement. And if you needed to take a few days, if your, Labrador of 14 years had passed on, they totally understood it. And many companies would have gone, what are you talking about? Like, so it's those kind of things, and they're really important to do, and they're really important because tech problems are easy. Well, no, they're not easy, but outside of the outside of the laws of physics, there's nothing a really smart engineer can't do. And if you give her a problem and say, hey, here's the problem space, here's what we're constrained by, go do, she'll go off and she'll come back, if she's given enough time, she'll come back with a solution. She might come back with a range of solutions. And we can always do that. We can always crack the technical nuts, in our sphere. So yeah, it's around all the other things we do every day.
You mentioned like a few different areas to consider. There's like a lot to unpack there. The cultural side, which is one that's easily forgotten about sometimes when we're navigating so many cultures. There's plenty to be said on that alone. But the other thing that resonated with me was kind of talking about acknowledging the emotion the emotion of somebody else, and that simply being heard, and saying what you heard in somebody else's, saying what somebody else said in your own words as a way to hear their emotion and just simply respond to to the emotion. Sometimes that alone can cause the blood to flow back from the triggered lizard brain into the rational brain, so that you can start, having that frontal lobe activity, if you will, and start being rational again.
I think that's amazing. And that's an amazing observation. It really, really, yeah.
It's an important one. And I like to tell folks, at my previous job, I was CTO at a company called Doctor.com, and they used to call me chief therapy officer, because because when you're dealing with lots and lots of folks, it tends to be, again, like interpersonal issues and like the human component that tends to get in the way, as you're describing, which I think is fascinating. The other thing I'm curious to learn more about, which you briefly mentioned, so you work with external engineering partners, and this actually ties into one of the first Q&A questions asked from folks in the audience. You mentioned Lohika, who's also sponsoring the event, but the thing I'm curious about is, as you're navigating external engineering partners, how do soft skills come into play, and what does that looks like? You mentioned like kind of the Ukrainian vibe, and I don't know what like the folks that you have that where you work with externally, like where they're based and some of the cultural elements, but there's this additional layer with it being an external partner, party. But I know that a lot of folks kind of integrate them more these days, even if they're technically external. So I'm curious, like, what your experience has been like in that regard.
So I think it's a really good question, because for me, I've never treated anybody on my team differently based on how I pay them. Do you know what I mean? So if you're a contractor or a full-time employee or an outsourced consultant or whatever you may be, I've never understood that. I've worked in organizations where the contractors weren't allowed to join the sports and social club, and you're there going, why would you do that? Like, they're part of the team. We want them to be here with us. We want them to buy into our journey. And you're saying because they're, and it's, it'd be really hard for payroll. And I'm going, they're a contractor. We're paying them very well. Tell them on day one that if they want to give us $50, it'll cover their sports and social contribution for the year. And then if we have ice cream day and an ice cream truck pulls outside the office, they're welcome to go down and enjoy it with everybody else. So you get that kind of thing. I've always treated people completely the same, and that's an ethos that I've carried through any of the businesses where I've been able to influence them to do that. But it is important, and it does create a difficulty, because sometimes the teams have issues with that. Sometimes you can get full-time employees who they lose sight of all of the benefits you get as a full-timer and only see the contractor day rate, and there's a bit of jostling over, well, they're getting paid for doing the same job as me. And, so some of it is just learning and bringing people on that journey and going, hey, look, these are different things. And when it all adds up, the differential is probably in the single digits. And, and you have all of this security that they don't have as a result. And when I go to cut, if I have to cut, which happens as an engineering leader, I cut those guys before I cut you. So, bear that in mind the next time you decide that their life is better than yours, that you've stuff that needs in your direction. But the ability to work with people, it shouldn't matter that they're a client. It shouldn't matter that they're a partner. It shouldn't matter that they're a competitor. And if you're in a meeting where and I've been in a couple of very testy meetings where quasi-partner competitors turn up, where you both have a similar set of service offerings and the customer is using both of you, but there's this new piece. And if you don't approach those situations with respect and don't approach those situations with understanding, very often they become adversarial where they don't need to be, and a more partner-based and more sort of collegiate approach yields a better result for everybody. And it's I don't think anybody gets up in the morning and comes into work to do a bad job. And I don't think anyone gets up in the morning and comes in to do a job that screws up my day. I don't think they do that. So anytime it happens, there's something behind it that I need to understand to sort of get to where it is. And if you, as you forget that, because we all do, as you said, the lizard brain gets, sort of engaged quite often. You've just got to take a breath and do that. And I think, as you said, replaying what you think they heard in your own mind is often enough, never mind saying it out loud. But yeah, so it shouldn't be a different thing, but that has more to do with the company culture you're working in than the humans you're interacting with. And change your company culture would be my advice to anybody who's suffering from that.
Totally. More and more organizations, I mean, I've experienced this myself, but I also hear about it talking with other, CTOs and tech executives, that more and more organizations are embracing integrating external third parties, international companies. Sometimes it's direct freelancer one-on-one, but a lot more times it's like you have a vendor relationship, like with whether it be Loki or anybody else, where you integrate them into the fold. I had a similar relationship for 5 years when I was with Doctor.com with 40 folks from Argentina. And, it's interesting how different some cultures can be from, like, and I'm actually not referring to the Argentinian culture, but the work culture about how folks see and interacts with contractors or folks that are paid differently, as you described. And I've always found that in situations where, regardless of where folks are from and where they're paid, that everybody, the organization, even the org chart itself, can sometimes be intermingled and with folks that are either contractor or not. You can have folks that are in the US reporting to folks that are in Argentina. We had that, and I think it's really it's poignant to call out this idea that everybody's a human first, right? And that everybody wakes up essentially to want to do good work, and whether or not they achieve that in the moment, like that's their goal. So I appreciate you calling that out. I want to move on a little bit to just a couple other of these questions that they're being asked. This next one from Ishara is, what are the differences between leading a small team versus a large team? I mean, you've seen and experienced both. You've seen the startup life and the enterprise kind of life, and I'm curious also as it relates to like soft skills, and how to navigate. We have some folks here who maybe have only managed small teams, or maybe are just starting to manage a large team with no management experience. Do you have any thoughts or advice for how they can navigate that?
I again sort of put people first is, and I would say this with almost everything you do. And the difference, there's a finite amount of people you can truly know and engage with fully, on any day-to-day basis. And therefore, as your teams scale, so currently I've what I would describe as a medium-sized engineering group, in that there's about 120 people in engineering, but that's because I'm at this curve in my life, and there was a time where I would have said 8 was a huge team, but I don't directly manage 120 people. I've got 14 dev teams. I've got a team of 7 engineering managers that work directly with me day to day. And what I do is I meet with my managers. It's all about meeting and communications, nothing more than that. So I meet with my team as a team once a week. I meet with my team as individuals once a week. And we have a daily stand-up every day just for 10 minutes to go, are we blocked, or standard, simple stuff. And then there's ad hoc whenever you need to. I meet with all of my direct reports at least once every 2 weeks. And I just check in with them, get a sense check of, is what I'm hearing happening, and is there anything I could do to expedite things? And very often it really simply is. It's just one of those things. And then at the broader level, I try and check in with just random individuals on an ongoing basis the whole time. And I would do things, and these are things where you consciously have to do stuff. If you're working remotely, if you're managing remote teams, so like you with Argentina, I did a stint where I had 60 or 80 engineers in Malaysia. And I used to go out there, again, 3 or 4 times a year to make sure that I spent some time with them. But I would consciously, before going out, download everybody's name and picture and just have it with me on the plane, and flick through 10 or 12 pages the whole time, so that when I did arrive there, I would have a sense of a name and a face and be able to meet people and know their name, you know what I mean? And consciously make that effort to know their name, because sometimes that's all they need. Sometimes they need a, hey, I heard you did a good job on that project, that's really, really good, or this went really, really well. So the larger your team is, the more you have to try and know a little bit about them all, and try and make a point of, calling them out and showing that you're aware of the work that they're doing. And I, again, going back to that thing, sort of occasionally somebody will ask me a technical question, but they revoked my Unix privileges a long time ago, because it's all about the people now. It's making sure, my job is to make sure that every engineer is unblocked, has the tools and the training they need to succeed, has anything she needs to make her day complete and move forwards. And that's it. You know what I mean? And I'm there really, that whole, and it's kind of a twee comment, but that servant leadership model is so important, where I am here to make sure that you can do the best job you can. And the price I charge for doing that is I get to bask in the glory of your results. And that's literally it. It's I'll stay there, I'll be there. You make sure that, if things go awry, that you know about it. You turn up on bridges late at night when you know everyone else is there, not necessarily to help, but just to go, hey, we're in this together. We're here together, and I know you guys are on this difficult call with a vendor. I know you're on this difficult internal call, and I'm showing up just to let you know that I'm not, just ignoring all of this. I don't clock off at 5 o'clock and expect you to work till 10 p.m. So consciously do those things and consciously work at those things is just how you do it. And it can be hard for us. I'm you're not going to believe this, but I'm quite naturally introverted. I enjoy my own company. I can sit in a room by myself in silence all day, and it's a lovely experience. So you work on it. Susan Cain wrote a great book called Quiet about this about a decade ago, but well worth picking up if you're an engineer who feels that you can't break out of that mold. Because it's you got to consciously do it. You got to work at this, and you got to make sure that if they're feeling that what's going on, if they're feeling that you're involved in their day as opposed to the corporation's day, they'll be much more motivated to deliver for the corporation. And that's, so it's not just about being touchy-feely and losing sight of the company's goals and what you're trying to get to. It's actually doing all the right things to amplify the results for the corporation.
You mentioned the book Quiet, which I haven't read, but it seems could be a very interesting read. There's a book that also I'm reminded of in what this topic that you're discussing, which is Radical Candor. It's one that I think comes up periodically, about challenging directly, but also caring personally. And I think a lot of what you've mentioned touches on that caring personally side. Reflecting on this kind of idea of large and small teams, one of the takeaways I'm gathering from what you're sharing is having a reasonable organizational structure so that your direct team still is essentially a small team, and using the distribution model of hierarchy to be able to scale, is the way that you're handling that. But what I also appreciate is there are some unique things that you're describing that are required for a large team, which, like flying over to Malaysia and memorizing everybody's names as best you can. I mean, that 100%, like those little things go a long way when people, I remember for myself, or in early days at large companies, when a very senior leader knows my name, it's something you never forget sometimes, because those senior leaders have such a huge impact, and they're like, oh my gosh, they know who I am, or even more, they know what I'm doing, and just acknowledgement alone sometimes is the best praise that you can have, whether you feel like you're doing a great job or not. So I think that's
very much so, and it is that the shadow of a leader is long, so you've got to remember that, and your behaviors will be probably replicated in your team's behaviors, and worse or better, depending on which way you go, amplified by that. So you do take care of that. But I'd sort of go, as a rule, just generally, you don't need a team lead till there's 4 of you. You don't need, you can't lead a team of more than, I would say, 8. So I kind of use it's funny, we've gone back to binary and sort of just, but I'd sort of go at 8, split the team in 2 again until it grows up to, the 16 number. And I kind of try and work on that model. I think the ability for me to have time for myself to think strategically about the business and communicate enough to all the people I'm working with. They're kind of the rules, you know what I mean? Because you might spend 20 hours a week just chatting to people about what's going on, and you know, you read another 10 hours reading reports and making sure that things are happening. It leaves you little enough time to do the things you're technically paid to do, which is, you know, think big about where the corporation's going to go and what it's going to do, and that's. So yeah, I would use that as a rule of thumb. It's not hard, but 4, 8, 16 at those times, just go there. They're appropriate, and it depends on the skill level of the team. It depends on, you know, have they worked together for years? Oh, a whole heap of stuff. But the, you know, the one pizza rule kind of thing in Amazon, it makes an awful lot of sense, and it allows them develop relationships that are meaningful as well. If the team's 35 people, you know, those relationships build anyway, and those teams build inside of those teams. There's never a team of 35 people. There's you know,
rather
18,
a functional team that's getting the attention that they need from their manager, certainly, right?
Yeah.
That what you described resonates with me as well. I've heard, you know, the 7 plus or minus 2, which also aligns with like psychology, you know, remembering. But it's funny how many companies I'm sure we've all been a part of where, you know, you have the folks that have 16 people on their team, or, you know, whatever, some ridiculous number that they're trying to manage themselves. And it's good to call that one out. And it's also a good segue into this next question from Salman, which is, what signals indicate that you as a leader are focusing too much on technical issues? There may be folks here who aren't sure if they're covering the human component enough. In fact, there may be folks that may think, are they doing it too much? But I think the more common thing, since we come from the technical origin as engineers, and we're kind of spending our day technically, like, how do we know if we're being too technical and we're not being, you know, indexing on the human side enough?
Well, I think it's a really, really good question, because, you know, even listening to it, I'm going, well, you're never focusing too much on the technical. That's our job. Our job is technical. I think it's there's a time for just focusing on the problem and just really getting into the nitty gritty and cracking that nut. And at those times, forgetting to check in with people is acceptable. Probably isn't even the word, but it's understandable. But I would find that if at the end of a week, and you know, again, this is coming from somebody who's intentionally scheduling meetings, I would find if at the end of a week I've realized I've bounced a bunch of meetings, or if I have used what is supposed to be a check-in with David to talk about the project, if I reflect on that, I go, okay, I'm losing sight of what I'm doing here, and we need to stop and pause and think about that, because if we are spending too much time on the technical issues, it's because those technical issues are looming large and we have a problem. So do you need to reset the project plan? Do you need to look at it and go, either we de-scope to make that date, or we let the date slide to deliver the scope? But we can't do this because it's getting in the way of the one thing that will actually allow it happen. And that's by reconnecting as people and going, I realized I bounced your call twice this week. I'm really sorry. I should not have done that. And very often, you know, the technical problems, if they're that big, are so big, they're not going to be solved at that moment in time. You know what I mean? And you're probably better off stepping back. And I very often find if you step away from a problem for 30 minutes and come back to it, your brain in the background, the subconscious mind that you're not even aware of, has done 80% of the thinking. And when you come back, the solution is easier. So I'd sort of do that. I'd sort of make a point of, if you're intentionally scheduling the time to be with people, then you won't ever focus too much on the technical issues because you're consciously making it available. And so do be intentional about that time. And then inside of that, I mean, there's some rules I would use. I would try and live by this. And obviously, you know, you fail a lot, but I try and have rules like in one-to-one meetings, I'm not allowed to cancel the one-to-one meeting. I have to ask for permission. You are allowed to cancel the meeting because you're busy doing your job. So this morning, for example, I got and I hadn't even noticed, at about 11 a.m. today, I sent a note going, hey, I'm running a little late for our one-to-one. And the response I got was, it's okay. It's, Orthodox Easter here in Ukraine, and I've actually taken the week off, so I'm not coming to the meeting either. But but it was important that I don't randomly cancel those meetings. You have to do that. So you set up little rules like that for yourself and little reminders. But it's just something to watch, and it's so easy to get drawn into it. I knew a woman once, and she told an amazing story about getting lost in tech. And this is, if true, and I've no reason to doubt it, this is just such a good example of it. But she worked with a very intense programmer who was working on a very intense problem, and had left the office, gone home, collected his family to go and watch a movie in the movie theater. And while driving back to the movie theater, went, I know what it is. And said, look, honey, I'm just going to stop running to do this. And got buried in his problem. And 14 hours later, got a tap on his shoulder saying, why is your wife and kids asleep in their car out in the lot? And he's going, what are you talking about? And she's going, no, he said it's only 8 o'clock. The movie's until 9. And she's going, no, you've missed 12 whole hours. You'd got so buried deep in that technical problem. So if something like that happens, you've gone too far, for sure. But it is, so I could see it happening. I literally, whenever I meet people who say they want to learn programming, and they go, we're just going to do an hour after work every day for the next few months. I'm in product, but I really want to get a good sense of how it all works. So I'm going to take up Angular, going to do whatever. And they're going, do not do that at 5 o'clock every day. Come in an hour early every morning and do it from, say, 7:30 to 8:30, from 8 till 9. That is how you will do it, and do it well. And they're going, why? And I said, because at 9 o'clock, you will have to go and do your day job. Whereas if you start doing that at 5 o'clock at night, you are going to miss, sports practice. You are going to miss cocktails with your friends. You're going to miss whatever else it was you were saying you were doing, because programming is so immersive, and you're solving a problem. You're getting into a thought space. It just sucks you right in. And so it's the most natural thing in the world for us to do. And then as you get a little more senior in engineering, the trick is to get them to revoke your Unix privileges, so you can't even go and program anyway. So it means you never do that. You never get into that.
Fair enough. And then you have your side projects if you really want to keep coding, right? That resonates with me. The one thing that you mentioned that I think is really great for anchoring this kind of, am I being too technical or not? You mentioned the one-on-ones, and both honoring them and making sure that you're not just always talking about projects and the work in them alone. I find I did a while ago, like a one-on-one educational class type thing. But one of the things I appreciated from that is managers fall into different kind of spectrums in terms of what's easy for them and hard for them in one-on-ones, right? And it goes both ways, right? So for a lot of technical folks, they may find that the comfort zone is staying in the technical, staying in the projects, and it's a lot more of a stretch goal to ask about the person's professional goals, like motivation, what they're feeling good about emotionally, asking about their emotions, right? That can be a challenge for a lot of us. That said, there's also a set of folks that are on the complete opposite end for whom they just focus on the emotional, just focus on how you're doing, and it's a pure therapy session, and like there isn't really much talk about the work at all. And in situations like that, there are sometimes missed opportunities to know about issues and conflicts that come up with the work. So I think it's as a kind of a litmus test to identify, like, are you doing things right? Looking at the one-on-ones closely and what you are doing and what you're not doing is a really good observation. So and don't for a moment, if I've created the view that I'm, a therapist here, that's not the case. But it is, it is, and I would always say be authentic. So if you aren't somebody who really wants to know about the deep and meaningful of what's going on in their life, don't pretend to. Don't pretend to be that person, but do acknowledge it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And it's likewise. I mean, if you're not looking, if in one-on-one in a professional capacity, you're not looking at their professional goals, their learning goals, their desire to grow outside of even the role that you have for them, then you're not doing your job as an engineering leader. That's just period. Just don't even think about it. Your job is to make sure they're ready for their next promotion, even if that is promoting them into a company outside of your own, because that's what you need to do, because you need to clear that space for the next cadre of young engineers coming up behind them. And so that bit goes without saying. The other parts, which are more personal, you know, if somebody wants to share, they share. If somebody doesn't, they don't. You don't push those boundaries. You be very careful with it, but on terms that you're comfortable with and they're comfortable with. And I think that's part of the learning is, you know, David wears his heart on his sleeve. Shane doesn't. You know, I've worked with people for 15 years and not known they were married. I worked in an amazing experience. I worked with a man for many years in Georgia, so very southern, obviously very religious, you know, type state. I had no idea that he was a practicing Christian at all until one day he told me that he needed to take some holidays because he was going to Palestine in a Christian outreach cross cultural program of exchange. And I was going, this is amazing. This is like, you know, I would have gone out with him. We had many successful deliveries, so I would, but just it never came up. And it was just a part of his life that he said, look, that's my personal life. And I'm telling you now because it's a big thing. I'm going to Palestine, and if anything weird kicked off, I just need you to know that nothing weird is going on. But yeah, so that's some people. And then there's other people who share everything, and almost to a level where you have to go, hey, you might want to tamp that down because not everybody wants to know all of that stuff about you. You know, and certainly not first thing on a Monday morning. And but it is just, you got to watch these things and look for them and manage them. But we're human, you know.
No, and I appreciate that you know, it's like you can get anyone under the sun in terms of like willingness to share or not share, and that it's not your, you know, there's no right or wrong way of being, right? It's just, it's more about navigating wherever someone is on these various spectrums and how they feel and identify and how they want to share or not. It's like find them where they are, you know, and help lead them to where they want to go, as well as to where you need them to go in the
very much so. Very much so.
So we have about 8 minutes left. We have a couple more questions here. This next one from Daniel is, what suggestions do you have for keeping an engineering team motivated and engaged?
Well, again, these are really, really nice questions. Motivation is all about, for me, I mean, outside of the project being really exciting and, you know, sort of the right dynamic tension between a deadline and a death march and making sure that you're managing that right. But in a world where it's a long drawn out project and the wins are small, let's say, and particularly for, say, if it's a long product release cycle and you're just going through sort of, you know, many sprints, but the delivery isn't cloud-based, it isn't continuous delivery. A lot of it is reminding teams of the small wins, reminding teams of going, look, you know, if you if you have a great sprint, if you've got a great show and tell, making sure that, you know, you acknowledge that and remember that. I'm very fortunate in that our CEO comes to all of the internal sprint show and tells. So the end of the sprint, he shows up pretty much religiously every Friday, 2 weeks for an hour. And some of the feedback is not so positive, but it's feedback and people accept it and like it. But when he's excited, when he's blown away by, oh my God, this is game changing. You guys have just, you know, I don't think you realize how valuable this is. And the kick we get from both of those things is really, really good. So I would say, as an engineering leader, encourage the sales folks, the CEO, the execs to check in on the sprint demos and on any rituals where you can show them the quality of your work and the output of your work is really important. And if you can get that, if it's a really large organization, so the CEO ain't going to ever turn up because there's 9,500 people or whatever different, but finding the appropriate level of seniority and get, you know, her or him to show is really, really motivating for the teams. And then down at a personal level, you caring and you making those shout outs and making a point of knowing, and it's not, can I say BS? But anyway, it's not, it's a real sense of, I know what you did over that last couple of sprints. I know it was really tough. I would make a point of trying to get the bad news early so that I know if a sprint's gone off the rails, they're the times you go in and tell the team they're doing a great job. Because, when everything's going really well, everything's going really well. Who needs to be motivated when it's all going really well? So just keeping an eye on that and going, hey, I've noticed that, their sprint cadence is dropping off, the velocity is dropping off on that team, and going and just understanding what's going on. And, is there something I can do to help? And if there isn't, know that we all care and we're all here to work with you to bring it across the line.
So I kind of actually hear, a couple different elements, from that. One is the care side, again, showing that there are people there that care.
Yeah.
But then the other one is also like the impact side, seeing that your work actually is making an impact on somebody, whether that be, a senior leader or, a direct manager or somebody else who sees the work, particularly when you can't see the direct users, who are experiencing your product, right? Then at least there's kind of a way of doing that. One other thing that I've heard that's kind of similar is, in terms of like making the pain personal, so to speak, that, you have folks, I've heard of situations where folks will have, engineers like watch a user study or two, or they'll bring them into like a customer support call, and, it's like making things personal, that sometimes that impact thing can be motivating.
Sure, and it is so revealing. There was BT Labs in the UK used to have literally the two-way mirror kind of effect, where they allowed the engineers watch what the users did with the tech. And it was just the head of the lab said it was just amazing. Like these, that's not how you use this. And I'm going, no, that is how you use it, because that's a user. That's what they've done with your piece of technology. No one's supposed to press that button 10 times in a row. And you're going, it didn't respond, so they kept pressing, and all of a sudden, smart sticky keys kicks in, and now their computer's locked and they can't do anything, and it's your fault. And it's really interesting to do those things and get them involved wherever you can. And it is motivating. Even with the right impetus behind a team, even the negative calls can be motivating, because you go, look, we've learned that what we thought was right isn't right, and that's okay. So let's go and do what is right, because we got this feedback that pointed us in a better direction. So yeah, but again, it's comms. It's comms.
Sure. So we have our one more question in maybe about a minute or so. Vlad asks, what do you do if engineers on your team like to work siloed and don't really like a lot of communication? They're one-on-ones, or they have the camera off. They're trying to finish meetings as soon as possible. How do you build that trust and engagement? I know we don't have a lot of time, so even just like a tip or two.
The answer is slowly. Slowly. You can't force something where it's not, but you can encourage people to realize that there's more to their job than just cutting the code. When I'm feeling brutal, I remind people with that mindset that I will just replace them with an AI bot pretty soon, because if it's just code cutting, that'll be automated, and the real work is in the problem solving and the solutionizing. But yeah, I would say slowly. You've got to encourage people out of their shell. You've got to encourage people to be okay being silent but present. And the cameras off thing, I think, is probably one that you need to be a little bit strict on and go, look, outside of if you're in the car and you're traveling to from something or some other reason, but generally cameras on, because we're all here, and it does create that connectivity. But it's very normal for engineers to want to, go back into the room, and you make time for that. Like we very consciously have do not disturb time in our days and in our sprints, where 3 hours a day is no Slack, no emails, no phone calls, no desk work. You're left to just bury yourself in your work, because you need that time to get work done. So if you do those things for an engineer like that, they'll very often go, okay, I'll meet you halfway and turn up at the 2 30-minute meetings that are either side of my 4 hours of quiet time. So again, find the levers that balance and bring a rational response from somebody who might emotionally be blocked from doing the thing.
I love it. Excellent. Well, with that, Shane, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom. I certainly felt that I learned a lot, and I think the audience feels the same. And it was lovely to meet you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.